Christmas or Yule is coming, and this was a kind of time for a strange runic shamanism which continued to be invented into the modern age. The Årsgang, a practice primarily known from southern Sweden and which continued to be in use at least until sometime in the 20th century. And this Årsgang, or year walk, is attached to specific holidays around Yule, and this is an example of the kind of information that you find in the runic and animist calendar project that has recently been published and you can find on this page. In this video I'll argue that this kind of mystical quest to win runes practice in the Årsgang is a form of Odinic shamanism, probably a reinvention of the pre-Christian Sather. And this is not necessarily what scholars will tell you, but I think the evidence is fairly clear, and I'll come back to that. I'm a historian of religion from the University of Uppsala, and my name is Rune Jarnø Rasmussen, and my main focus has been on Afro-Atlantic religions, but I'm also working on understanding Nordic history of religions as rejected animist knowledge forms. Okay, this video is about this shamanic Nordic practice that survived into the modern age by being reinvented in this Årsgang, or year walk, mainly in southern Sweden. And when I use the word shamanic, I use it as a generic term that refers to practices that create contact with other spheres or other beings through altered stages of consciousness, just so that's clear. Now, I mean, to me, it's quite astonishing to see how few people are aware of this phenomenon, the Årsgang, or year walk. And I'll get back to why that is. But the Årsgang has two elements. There's a mythic complex and there's a practice. And the mythic complex is a set of stories about a rune magician who was called Kjetil Runske in Sweden, or in Denmark he was called Kjell Rune. And the Swedish version is definitely the one that's most interesting. Kjetil Runske, he brings the runes to human beings by stealing them from Odin. He enters into a mountain and steals the runes from Odin. And this gives him magical powers, and he then has these magical powers for the rest of his life. And then, a bit like Merlin, he's caught by being magically bound by an apprentice, and in different locations in Sweden there'll be local stories saying that he's bound under this or that lake, or that it was him who placed this or that remarkable stone. So that's the myth, and I believe that this myth is somehow related to the practice, the actual Årsgang, or year walk, which is interesting because this practice is a practice of doing what Kjetil Runske did, winning runes through a shamanic vision quest. In some cases you win them from a very Odinic figure, and to me as a historian of religion this almost looks like a kind of a rudimentary initiation technology that was somehow lived on in the Årsgang complex. But let me wind back just a little bit, because since the saga era, the sort of Christmas, Yule, midwinter period was an important time for divination, and people considered that there was a kind of a proximity between the realm of the dead and the realm of the living. So on specific days, the worlds of the living and of the dead are sort of close to each other, and on those days this shamanic vision quest called Årsgang can be performed. It's possible on those specific days, Christmas Eve for instance. So the year walker, the performer of this Årsgang, tries to create contact with the dead by going to burial grounds or going into the wilderness on these holiday nights. The purpose is to gain visions of, well, normal-like info, human life, deaths, harvest, marriage, misfortunes, war and love, basically. And the purpose is also to gain second sight by acquiring the runes. And the procedure is somewhat along these lines. You have to comply with certain taboos. You have to fast from midday. You have to tell no one that you're seeking this vision quest. You must see no fire before going out, greet no one while you're walking, and give no answer if you're spoken to. You also have to avoid laughing and being afraid. The year walker basically has to isolate himself. And this is a kind of what's sometimes called sensory deprivation, which is a common feature of shamanic practices. And this is noted, by the way, by the Swedish researcher Tommy Kuusela, whose article on the practice I've put a link to in the text for this video. So the year walker has to walk in absolute silence, don't look back and not laugh or be frightened, and then he will see visions that will try to eject him from this shamanic experience, right? And the walk will then go to a cemetery, perhaps more cemeteries. The year walker will perhaps go up to the church and look through the keyhole inside the church, and he may see the dead having a mass, for instance, at Christmas Eve. And he'll be given visions of the coming year. So it's kind of this, vision quest to be given visions of the coming year. And it has to be done every year. And on the 7th year, the walker will meet a spirit rider with fire from the neck and a rune staff sticking out his mouth. And he then has to be bold and rush in and take this staff from the rider, and this is winning the runes. Sometimes runes would be won from a dangerous supernatural sow, of all things, and winning the runes will make you wise, and in time it will grant you divinatory power. On the 9th year of performing the Årsgang, the walker will see dwarves wearing hats, and then he has to take one of these dwarfs' hats. And taking that hat completes the vision quest. The year walker has now gained divinatory power, and if he wears the hat and holds the staff, he can foretell things. So that's Årsgang. And this is the kind of stuff that you can read about in the account of Nordic animism that I've recently published, and which is still available. You can order it through this Facebook page here. And and pre-Christian Nordic religion also has the kind of shamanism and techniques of achieving altered stages of consciousness and so on. And there are sources that describe, for instance, invocational singing that creates contact with the spirit world for divinatory purposes. And there are also theories of the use of divinatory drums, perhaps similar to those used by the Sami people, and I'll put a reference to an article about that specifically here in the commentary as well. And also there are Eddic poems who describe like ritual ordeals to gain mystical knowledge, a typically shamanic trait, and there are voyages between worlds and communication with the dead and so on. And there are also vision quests described in the saga literature, and this was called sitting out. And it's basically isolating oneself from the community, typically around Christmas or Yule, seeking out funeral sites, typically sitting on burial mounds. And the funny thing is that if you want information on the pre-Christian Viking Age practice, such as Sather, then there's an entire research literature available. But the Årsgang, this modern era practice, which is surely attested, there's very little information about it outside Scandinavian research libraries. There's a little bit written here and there, and one example is this fine little article by Tommy Kuusela that I'm linking to somewhere in the text here. But Tommy Kuusela also states, for instance, that there is no certainty that the Årsgang complex can be traced back to pre-Christian belief. And of course he's right that certainty is a very big word when we are hypothesizing about past continuities. That's for certain, so of course you can't be sure. But let's consider the similarities between these two complexes of shamanic practice just for a moment. Both the pre-Christian practices and the Årsgang have divination of life matters performed during Yule and midwinter solstice celebrations, a strong element of contact with the realm of the dead, vision quests going to wilderness or funeral sites. Odin plays a central role. The purpose is to acquire mystical knowledge, specifically in the form of runes, and the motive of doing this by entering into a mountain specifically. So if you want to claim that there isn't any continuity between, just a second. If you want to claim that there isn't any continuity between pre-Christian shamanism and the Orskang, then you're implicitly claiming that a complex with all these different features was there, and then it disappeared completely, and then it re-emerged with all these motives in a different constellation, of course, but fairly intact, different composition. Now, I think that is possible, but it's not very likely. I think the simplest and most evident way to read these data is that Nordic shamanism basically kept being reinvented. And of course, things have changed down through the ages. They always do, and we have to assume that they do. They change a lot, and that's what tradition is. It's change. It's not stasis. It's change. And shamanic practices, for instance, they're supposed to change, not supposed to remain, immobile or something. And perhaps it's even surprising that the Orskang hasn't changed more from pre-Christian practices today. So, but I totally understand actually where Kuusela is coming from, because Swedish cultural history has these amazing and in itself interesting presence of like space cadet nationalism, where people would claim that Uppsala is really the location of the sunken Atlantis, where the primordial Gothic Swedish people, emanated from, and so on. And of course, it's important as a contemporary scholar to distance yourself from that kind of stuff. It's fairly evident. But I also think that the national motivation that underlies explanations is actually also active in seclusion, that you want to lock stuff into a distant past as this imagined, untouched thing. It's isolated inside scholarly minds, severed from all the ooga booga that the peasants are running around doing in the countryside, And I think it's mind-blowing how much is written about Seidr that doesn't even touch the fact that this tradition stayed alive, it seems. Centuries after Christianity became powerful discourse in Scandinavia, where there was still Nordic shamanism being practiced. Of course, you can question if it should be called Seidr, but a work like Dag Strömbäck's classic work on Seidr, people were perhaps still doing it in the villages when he, in the early 20th century, when he's doing this. But that's absolutely uninteresting, it's because it's not Viking. The thing is that it's not Viking. And even today, contemporary scholars, they will jump through a million hoops and compare Seidr shamanism with all kinds of Siberian and North American shamanisms, like from the Yukagir and the Haida and the Tlingit and whatnot. But the same tradition stayed alive into the 23rd century in Sweden. And I think this is a case of what I sometimes call Viking washing, that Vikings and the Viking Age is this iconic imagined past of North European nationalisms, and the construction of Vikings then also shape research institutions and disciplines. So if you're a Viking Age scholar, then you're unlikely to want to compromise the whole idea of the Viking Age by muddying the definition of the Viking Age. So it's sort of self-enforcing. We want a Viking Age to mirror itself in and to produce these nationalisms, and then we create Viking research. So Viking researchers will then continue to produce the Viking Age. So we so there's like a circular logic in it. And this secludes the whole idea of Nordic traditional religion inside this Viking age, or there's a tendency that it does that, where the actual fact is that a lot of traditional Nordic religion continue to change and be reinvented down through the histories, such as in this Orskang Årsgang complex. And of course it changed, that it mixed with other belief systems and so on, and that's what culture is. It's change, it's mixing. Culture is mixing. Anyway, so if you're interested in Nordic shamanism, then don't forget about the tradition of vision quest that remained in Sweden. And check out the articles that I linked, particularly Tommy Kuusela's nice little article. And if you're interested in stories like this, those stories of the rejected stuff, the stuff that they normally don't tell you about Nordic religion, then follow this channel. This is the Nordic Animism channel. And yeah, see you around. Ciao.